Welcome to Time Monk Radio Network. I'm Gemini, and we are welcoming back Susan Weed as part of our Health and Wellness series to discuss the very healing and often overlooked medicinal herb, plantain. Joining us from the Time Monk Radio Forum is Phoenix. This information is neither intended nor implied to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment, and should not be used in place of your regular health care. Hello, Susan. Welcome back.
I'm so glad to be back. On to plantain.
On to plantain. Sounds great.
On to plantain, okay. Plantain is not a banana. A friend of mine who worked in health food stores said, I can always tell when they've been reading the herb books. They come in and buy Golden Seal on a banana. No, although it sounds like a banana, it's not. Plantain is a rather inconspicuous plant that grows just about everywhere. As soon as you get outside, see if you can find some plantain. Now, I bet you're going to ask, how can I know if I have found plantain? Well, it's actually really easy to tell if you found plantain, because plantain has 5 parallel ribs in every leaf. What does that mean? Let's think about, say, like an oak leaf or a maple leaf. There's one rib running right up the center of it, and then ribs that kind of fan out from that in a network, right? But plantain has not just one central one with one fanning out from it, but 5 that run parallel to each other. As a matter of fact, these ribs are raised off the back surface of the leaf. And if you are in a situation where you really need to stitch up a wound, there's an actual string in there that causes that little ribbing, and you can pull it out. And since it's been inside the leaf, it's completely sterile. And if you have a sterile needle, you can thread this plantain thread through that needle, stitch up the wound, and the thread will dissolve as the wound heals. You can also find these same sterile threads in the midrib of comfrey. An off chance that there's something so huge that you really do need to stitch it and need some emergency help in doing that, those are your options. The leaves of plantain can be roundish and kind of flat to the ground. That's the common plantain or the broad-leaf plantain. And often you'll see it with the leaves kind of chopped in half because it's been mowed by the lawnmower. That's one of the reasons that you find plantain in the grass, because it has the ability to hunker down low enough to just have its head cut off by the lawnmower, but not the rest of it. Plantain,
that's a perfect description.
Yes. Plantain can also be long and narrow, with the leaves more upright. And that's your lance-leaf plantain, sometimes called the English plantain. Some herbalists believe that the English plantain is a stronger medicine. I have never really noticed much difference at all. And they usually use the broadleaf plantain because it is the more common one. It's the one you're going to be finding in city sidewalks and those kinds of situations. And even in a country setting, you're going to find, maybe 20 broadleaf plantains for every one narrowleaf plantain that you find. And I wouldn't want you to think that plantain only lives in the temperate areas, lives in tropical areas. It lives in subarctic areas. And anywhere you go in the world, you are going to find some plantain. It has its own family, the Plantagenaceae, and very interesting plant. I spent some time sitting with plantain and listening to it. And I said to plantain, tell me who you are. And plantain said, I'm a Quaker lady. I am underfoot because I don't mind being walked on. And that makes me easily available to you. I like to be right here so that you can make use of me. And I'm here for peace. And my sweetheart, who's a Shakespearean actor, knew that I was sitting and talking with Plantain. And so he went to Shakespeare to see what Shakespeare had to say about Plantain. And it said, the plain plantain is underfoot. And I was stunned because we have, 300 or 400 years between me and Shakespeare. And yet Plantain is saying the same thing. Because we're not just making this up. When you hear people talk about plants, talking to them, they're not just making it up. The plants really are saying things, and they say the same things over and over again. I am plain plantain. I am underfoot because I want to be here for you. I want to be available to you. I teach children to call this plant Band-Aid plant or owie weed, and you will find it in playgrounds. Plantain is always growing in playgrounds. And if there's an injury in a playground, and sometimes there are, plantain is easily picked, chewed, and put on that injury. Some people call plantain white man's foot. White man's foot is certainly an interesting name for it. We wonder how this got started. After talking to Plantain, I wrote about it, and I sent what I had written out to a couple of people to review, and one of them wrote back and said, well, you talk about Native American uses of this plant, but this isn't a Native American plant. It was brought here by the Europeans, and that's why they called it white man's foot, because wherever the white men went, the plantain would spring up. Well, we're not so sure about that. We're really not. It's a common story. I've heard it a lot, but we're not so sure about that. We think it was probable that there was already plantain in North America before European contact, but that the soles of the shoes of the white people, the seeds of plantain could stick to more easily than the moccasins of the native people. And the seeds of plantain are actually quite sticky. And then, so wherever the white people would walk, they would kind of like stamp the plantain seeds into the ground. That's why the plantain is growing in your driveway, because it's stuck to the tires of your car. And your car planted the plantain in your driveway. You go to a college campus, you can see what corners the students are cutting, because you see a line of plantain right across the corner where they're walking. A white man's foot, or perhaps any man's foot, or even every woman's foot, because the seeds follow our paths. The seeds grow into plants and show us where we've been. Now, I mentioned that you can walk into a drugstore and buy witch hazel, an herbal remedy right there, still for sale in a drugstore. And you can also walk into a drugstore and buy plantain seed. What's it called, Phoenix?
Say again, plantain seeds?
Plantain seed. If I came into your drugstore and wanted plantain seed, what would you sell me?
I'm not really sure.
Well, let me make it a little easier for you. The one that you would sell me is the husk of the seed of a South American plantain called Psyllium.
Oh, yeah. So that's the psyllium fiber then.
That's right. And you have various choices of psyllium fiber for sale there, right?
Yep. We've got brand and generic Metamucil. It's all psyllium to me.
It's all psyllium to you. And it's not even the psyllium seed, it's the husk of the psyllium seed, which is very fibrous and mucilaginous, and therefore an excellent bulk-producing laxative. We think probably because it has insoluble fiber, probably pretty healthy altogether. And you can literally walk out of your door and find plantain seed later on in the year, where you're going to start looking for it in July or August. The broadleaf plantain has a very large stalk of seeds. In about an hour, we can harvest between 1 and 2 pounds of plantain seed. Because the husk is as edible as the seed, once it's dried, we just strip it off the stalks, store it in jars, and anytime we cook any grain, we add plantain seed to it. Cook oatmeal, we cook plantain seed and husk in with it. Cooking rice, we cook plantain seed and husk in with it. very easy way to improve the essential fatty acid profile of your diet, as well as to really promote intestinal health and, of course, to help heal certain problems as well. So plantain seeds, the landslave plantain has very small seed head, and when the broadleaf plantain is flowering, it sends up this stalk, which is maybe 6 to 10 inches tall, and has tiny little purple flowers. You literally need a magnifying glass to see these tiny little purple flowers. The landsleaf plantain sends up a bare stalk, and at the top of the stalk is maybe an inch, kind of a cone with flowers that are white and stick out from the sides, so that from the top, when you're looking down at it, it looks like a flying saucer, because these flowers are sticking out around this little projecting cone at the top of it. So it's not very easy to harvest the seeds from the landsleaf plantain. It's usually the broadleaf plantain that we harvest the seeds from. Plantain leaves, all plantains all over the world, are bland and free of known poisons. There are no alkaloids, glycosides, resins, or volatile oils that we know of in plantain, therefore making it absolutely safe for anyone of any age to put in their mouth, chew, and then put on sting. We talked about the bee stinging me, cut. We talked about the big cut that I had that it helped heal and stop the bleeding from. To put on bruises and scrapes as well. We talked about plantain stopping itching. And for the dog lovers there, you know how in the summertime the dogs will sometimes get a flea and a flea bite and will begin to gnaw at the itch of that flea bite, and gnaw to the point where they've actually gnawed a hole in their skin, created a hot spot, and then because it's uncomfortable, they continue to gnaw. It can be a very difficult problem with dogs. Plantain ointment, thick layer, can be put right on the hot spot. The dog is going to lick it off. It's okay. Plantain is bland. It is non-poisonous. It's perfectly safe. You just keep putting the plantain ointment on, let the dog lick it off, perfectly fine. And the licking, rather than on the gnawing, as well as the plantain ointment, will heal that hot spot. There'll be no more itching. There'll be no more pain. And so the dog will simply let it heal rather than gnawing a big hole in itself. I actually had one person who told me that their dog came limping home and had been shot with a bullet which had passed through the flesh of one of the dog's legs without injuring anything or causing a massive bleed. And she was able to keep that wound open and to eventually heal it by boiling up plantain leaves and pouring this plantain liquid through and into the bullet hole and keeping that area very, very wet. I've mentioned several times in these first aid talks about keeping the wound, keeping the injury wet. And if you've ever had injury and gone to a hospital and had stitches, you know they've told you to keep it dry. And so you might wonder why I'm saying exactly the opposite. Well, keeping it dry so the stitches won't pull out. Really, it's for the sake of the stitches, not for the sake of the wound. And again, it's why I started out saying you may not want to do that. Keeping the wound wet is what causes healing to happen. And more importantly, keeping the wound wet allows the wound to heal from the bottom up. When we stitch a wound closed, or when we use things that are too astringent, like Golden Seal, which you notice I haven't suggested for any wound, the wound can close over at the top, leaving an area an anaerobic area beneath the surface, and tetanus is an anaerobic bacteria. That means it can only live in the absence of oxygen. So if one wound is kept open and wet, you can't get tetanus because you're not providing a place for that tetanus to grow. Whereas when the wound is healed over at the top or treated with strong astringent things or sewn together, then you have definitely had a threat of tetanus. And so if you've had those stitches, you probably had a tetanus booster because they know they have just made a playground for tetanus. Good reason for thinking about using plantain instead. Now, when we talked about making things, we talked about making plantain oil. And you can take either or any of the plantains that grow and harvest the leaves again on a sunny day, and preferably in the afternoon. Chop them up, put them in a jar, pour oil of your choice over it. Make sure there's a little head of oil, about a quarter of an inch of oil over it, and put a lid on it. Now, I want you to label the lid rather than the jar. And I want you to take your lidded, labeled jar and put it in a bowl or a plate with a rim. Oil and water don't mix. We're using fresh plants. They contain water and oil. There's going to be some reaction between the water in those plants and the oil, and that reaction is going to force some of the oil out, even with the tight lid on it, because oil gets everywhere. It's going to force it out from underneath the lid and down the sides of the jar, completely destroying any label you would have put on the jar, but your label is on the top of the lid, and so it is safe. And, of course, then making a bit of an oily mess underneath the jar, which is why it's in a bowl or a plate with a lid. I visited a student, and she said, you know how you said it's really important when you are making herbal oils that you keep them away from heat? I said, yeah, it's a cold infusion we're doing. And she said, I remember how you said it's really important to put them in a bowl or a plate with a lid? I said, mm-hmm. She said, well, let me show you what happens when you don't do those things. Like any good student, she had ignored what I had said, and she took her oils and she had shelves built behind and just above the stove that she used for cooking her meals, where they got very warm indeed and had a very interesting reaction between the water and the oil. And in fact, she had to tear out that wall of her house because it became a fire hazard because it was completely soaked with oil. So hopefully that will cause you to remember to put your oil in a bowl. Many people call me and say, okay, I made that plantain oil, and it must have gone bad. I said, wait, it didn't go bad. Plantain oil is supposed to smell like an Italian delicatessen, okay? When you open the jar of plantain oil, it's got a framanda smell. You know, it's a framanda, your toenails, cheese. It's got a strong smell. It smells like fermented meat. Because what is in plantain leaf is protein. And it hasn't really fermented, but it's going to smell like, whoa, it's going to smell like a big sausage there. And you say, okay, that's a plantain oil. It's supposed to smell like a sausage. It's good. And use it just like that, sausage smell and all. Or you can thicken it with a little beeswax, and then it will tame down, and it will smell a little sweet, like the honey smell of beeswax. Or as the people at Red Moon Herbs did for their Green Wonder Salve, they added some yarrow, which has quite a nice smell, and some comfrey, which can also get fairly smelly too. But they do a shorter brew on the comfrey, usually just 3 weeks on the comfrey, so that it doesn't, because it can rot in the oil, and that also calms down the smell of the plantain. I mentioned mist before, the healing mist that this MD had created. And while I'm not allowed to tell you exactly what's in it, I am allowed to say that there is definitely plantain in it. And that means she tinctured the plantain. So we've talked about using the plantain fresh, just as it is, as a spit poultice. And it works wonderfully to stop the itching and stop bleeding and stop pain and to stop swelling. And we talked about using it as an oil, and it does all of those things as well as helping to heal sprains. Like comfrey, plantain is an excellent aid to tendons and ligaments. And my experience has been not with myself, but with others who have sprained their ankle. And I had one woman who was on her third sprain in a year, and she had been doing kind of the doctor-recommended things. And I suggested that this third time, she use plantain because she felt that her ankle was getting weaker and weaker. And her report back was that the plantain not only healed the sprain faster than the other things that she had been told to do, but that she felt that it made her ankle stronger. And I kept in touch with her for a couple of years, and she did not resprain the ankle. So I think she was right. I think that the plantain did, in fact, make her ankle far, far stronger. Plantain has also been used, interestingly enough, to help counter coughs. And both a syrup of the mucilaginous seeds has been used to soothe the throat tissues, as well as the tincture of the leaves, which we are talking about at this particular juncture. And the tincture of the leaves seems to have a very interesting effect on tightening and soothing throat tissues. Often things that soothe the throat actually make the throat lax, and singers say, oh, I can't use this because it makes it difficult to sing. Slippery elm. And of course, they're often called singer's lozenges, slippery elm lozenges, because slippery elm is something that does not relax the vocal cords. It just soothes them, and so you can actually sing. And plantain also has that wonderful, wonderful ability. Hey, everybody. Thanks for hanging in with me for such a long time here. You've been wonderful.
Oh, Susan, it was enjoyable. Thank you so much.
You are so welcome, Gemini.
Thank you, Susan, for taking us on a journey through your connection to the Earth and her green allies. Please join us next week as we delve into questions surrounding menopause. How do we know if this is menopause? What is perimenopause? And what is menopause? On behalf of Time Monk Radio, green blessings and be well.